Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be talking to you about Armada 2.0. Now, why am I talking to you about this? Because there is no Armada 2.0. Let me reinforce that. There is no Armada 2.0. But I think, there's been a lot of speculation that FFG may be considering something like that, especially since they've done it with X-Wing, and we haven't had a whole lot of news for Armada lately. And that could be a sign that maybe they're preparing to try to, reinvigorate the franchise a little bit. That may be so. It also may not be. I honestly have no idea. But if that is something that they're thinking about, I think it deserves some attention from us, and I think it deserves us to be talking about it and talking about things that we think could be improved, as well as talking about things that we do like about Armada the way it is now, because wouldn't it be terrible if they did Armada 2.0 and you lost your favorite part? I know some people really like squadrons, and imagine if they took squadrons out. I know some people really like the fact that the shield dials are on the ships, and wouldn't it be a shame if they took those out. So I kind of want to talk about things like that, but specifically things that we think could be improved in this article. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. I also want to remind you guys, more giveaways going right now. Make sure you just subscribe and leave a comment, with more details on that on Crabbok.com. Speaking of .coms, I want to point you to this latest Steel Command article from Truthiness. You may recognize Truthiness from the FFG forums, very active community member, very knowledgeable, and Truthiness wrote this amazing article about Armada 2.0 and what he thinks, it would benefit in a 2.0. Most of that I actually agree with 100%. I do have some reservations on there, but I'll talk about this, and I'm going to put a link to that article in the description below. So if you haven't already read this article, stop right now, go read this article, check out that blog. It's actually, it's actually a very good blog. So a lot of really good information that's Armada specific, whereas like my channel, I cover a lot of different things, but if you're looking for some Armada specific stuff, that's a really good option. So in this article, one of the things Truthiness is talking about is getting rid of Demolisher and Yavaris. He exaggerates a little bit, like burying them in a deep hole. And I get that. I think that's one of the things that comes with making a game, and early on, you have some really cool mechanics, but those turn out to be so broken that everything else has to be balanced around them. X-Wing kind of saw this with Biggs in the original release for X-Wing, and I think like these two are two titles that are kind of like the Biggs of Armada, in that they are so strong that everything else has to be balanced around them. Anything else that's going to increase, black dice, which are already strong, has to be balanced around, well, how is Demolisher going to use it? Any other squadrons, or any things that help squadrons have to be balanced around, how's Yavaris' double tap going to be able to abuse that? So, that definitely creates kind of like them, almost this effect that they painted themselves into a corner. So maybe burying them, maybe just removing them altogether, but I like the idea of just changing them to be something that still goes along with the flavor of what they're supposed to be doing without being specifically that. Like Demolisher can still be an attack ship, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that good of an attack ship. Yavaris can still be a carrier, but it doesn't have to be that good of a carrier. I wouldn't change them such that suddenly now Demolisher is a carrier and Yavaris is a tank. I wouldn't do that. I would keep them in the spirit of their current roles, but maybe do something different with them. Another thing that Truthiness is talking about is the activation advantage mechanic, and how certain cards like Strategic Advisor can have kind of thrown that out of whack. And that's interesting. Although I don't really personally have a huge problem with Strategic Advisor, but I do understand his points on what he's saying about it and how it kind of threw that MSU, a lot of small ships list kind of out of competitiveness, because it diminished the activation advantage that you would get. And it's interesting because a lot of people have asked me, how I feel about activation advantage, and I think activation advantage is a part of the game. It's a part of the strategy of the game. But he also talks about, well, maybe there should be some counterplay, and I think that there's actually something to be said from that. Truthiness suggests some type of Overwatch mechanic, and and the Overwatch mechanic is, very similar to in Legion. You can take a standby action, so if somebody does move, you can then fire at that point, so you're delaying your attack. Something like that might be, and he's not saying that specifically, but maybe something in that ballpark. And I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't mind perhaps the possibility of maybe large ships to get some type of counter, just like how squadrons have counter. How come ships can't get some type of counter as well? and maybe large ships get, a larger amounts of counter. That basically, helps defeat the amount of swarm. Or maybe there's a counter and a number value. Like you can counterattack 1 time. Maybe you can counterattack 2 times. Maybe a really large ship is going to have a counter 3. So the first 3 ships. So you can still get swarmed, but if you get swarmed by 3 small ships, maybe it's not as damaging to you. Maybe it's like if you're going to bring a swarm, maybe you need to bring 6 ships because now the second 3 won't be able to be counterattacked, and that still gives an advantage to the person with a whole bunch of, a large swarm of ships. I'll pick my 3 that I don't mind if they get shot first to shoot you first and absorb your counters, and then I'll, that could be a really cool mechanic. So, I like the idea of counterplay. I would like to see it maybe go that route, perhaps, rather than an Overwatch mechanic, but either way, something like that to make those tough ships more durable to 3 small ships would be great, right? He also talks about combining some things, and I think that's a great opportunity to take a mechanic that was early in the game and combine it with something that came out later in the game. Grit being, instead of Intel just giving everybody heavy, how about if it gave nearby squadrons grit? That's one idea to make Intel less completely broken. I think Intel is one of those keywords that was way too strong and trivialized almost all of the squadron play. And so Intel was always a problem. And I think if it changed to give people grit, you're still keeping stuff in the spirit of what it's supposed to do without making it completely broken. And also the damage control officer, merging that into the contain token. I think that's a great idea. Officers are really rare. Unless, of course, you're going to give every ship, multiple officer slots. But I don't know. Then I think you're going into too much of a change. So if you just straight up said, all right, the contain token has the effect of damage control officer around the clock, that would be huge. Because contain is, people have been talking about this for a while, contain is the least good of all of the tokens. And, I mean, granted, it's good if, on a Super Star Destroyer, if you can take a damage control officer. But usually outside of that, it's just not that good. And it would be a great idea to merge damage control officer into it. But that means, what do you do with damage control officer? Because a lot of these things are things that could, in theory, be FAQ'd. But it's so much stuff. Maybe it would go into a 2nd edition. You don't have to include damage control officer if you're going with a 2nd edition. But if you did, you just make damage control something different. Maybe you can sacrifice damage control officer to repair a hull damage. Something useful but not broken, right? If it heals 1 damage off of your ship and it's a one-time use, fine. Maybe you'll put that on a small ship. Maybe I'd put it on an Architans, especially if it's cheap enough. So that would be something maybe. Removing the flotilla cap is another thing that Truthiness talks about, and I really like this one because flotillas were broken for a long time. That big FAQ came out, and they did a whole bunch of stuff. They overcompensated for the flotilla problem. Fixing relay was brilliant. Brilliantly done. I love the way relay works now. It makes sense. It's probably the way it was always supposed to have worked. Thematically, that's the way it should have always been. So now relay just extends range rather than making range infinite. Great. Got it. Flotilla's not counting towards being tabled. Love that. But the flotilla cap, I already don't need it to be only 2 flotillas. But, in this case of an 18-point GR75, it might have allowed for some people to just completely spam, and then 1 big heavy ship. So Truthiness suggests, well, what if we remove the flotilla cap, keep the other fixes in place, but increase the point cost of flotillas just a little bit more to where they're closer to a cheap hammerhead or something like that. And I'm that's not a bad idea. I could get on board with that. I'm not sure. Right now, I'd be content with simply removing the flotilla cap and then seeing how that impacts things and watching, games evolve over a few months before deciding if a hard points change were required. But that's, that's still a good idea. And the last thing Truthiness is talking about is using an app so that you can make changes on the fly. That's the one that I'm not in, that I kind of disagree with, just because I don't like the app implementation in X-Wing 2nd Edition. So if you were going to do an app, I think you'd have to do it drastically different, and I don't even have many good suggestions on an app. I would like an official squad builder from FFG that maybe has all of the rules and stuff and pertinent information all included in one in one app that, especially for tournaments, you can just like, I can hold up a barcode for my list and it can be scanned into a database or something like that. That would be cool. But outside of that, I don't really want a whole lot of that, because there's already websites like Ryan Kingston's Fleet Builder, and there's a lot of other ones, but I use Ryan Kingston's the most. But there's like at least 3 really, really solid Armada fleet builders out there, so I don't think we really need a fleet builder that bad. But it would be nice. But I'm not a big fan of not having everything printed on the cards. Like for X-Wing, you don't have the upgrades on the ships, and you don't have the point costs on the ships. And for me, maybe this is just me personally, I'm curious how you guys feel about it, but like, I have a hard time when they show us a preview of something that's coming out soon, and I don't even know, it's not even a preview to me, because I can't tell you what it costs, so I don't know how balanced it is. You know, oh, here's a new X-Wing, okay, great, but how much does it cost? You know, I don't know how to rate the power. Imagine if we got Super Star Destroyer previews, and there's no point cost at the bottom. You'd have no idea what type of game you could play it in. You'd have no idea what type of balance it was. You know, so I don't like not having that stuff on there. But that's just from a previews perspective. And also, you wouldn't know what type of gear and upgrades it could take. And that's a really big deal. Like, not knowing if you're going to be able to, like, imagine you saw the Liberty for the first time, and you didn't know that it could take 2, turbo laser options. And that was like one of the coolest things about the Liberty when it came out, is that you could take 2 turbo lasers. And so, like, if you didn't have that information on the card, you wouldn't have even known, and it'd have been a real bummer. And so I just don't like not having everything on the card. I would rather it be printed on the card, maybe with an asterisk, and then just know that everything's subject to change, and then use an app if you have to, but kind of keep that as a last resort. I think with X-Wing, maybe it helps because X-Wing is so much more flushed out and so much more imbalanced and broken, whereas Armada is, for the most part, a lot more closely, like more of a well-oiled machine. There aren't as many balance issues in Armada, so I just don't think it's as likely that we're going to have to do hard errata that would require an app. So I would rather have everything printed on the cards. But that's me. That's my personal opinion. I'm curious. I mean, if you disagree, that's totally cool. I just want it to be a discussion. So that's basically what's kind of covered in that article. Definitely read it, because he elaborates a lot more on those topics than I did. I'm just kind of covering them briefly, but I thought it was a really well written article, and it got me thinking about what are some other things that I would do. Because I've kind of given you some of my input onto those points. But other things that I would do for a 2.0 is, I wonder if a 2.0 wouldn't have to be handled in the way X-Wing did. If we could make it really different, what if it was handled simply through a rules update? Our last FAQ was a really big one for Armada. Had a mountain of changes and very much changed the game for the better. And I think you could do something like that again to revamp Armada. And maybe you didn't call it second edition. Maybe you just called it Armada Rules Update 2. Or even you could even call it second edition if you wanted to. But make it completely 100% compatible with first edition. And you do that through a rules update. And so perhaps, just let me know if you think this is something that could happen. It would be a huge FAQ and errata. You would errata all of those problem cards. You would errata things like Demolisher and Yavaris. Just have them do something different that's still in line with what they do. Maybe Yavaris just grants, an extra reroll to every squadron it activates, and its point cost is cheaper. Or maybe Yavaris just adds like 1 blue die to every squadron it activates. Maybe Demolisher, gets to do gets engine text built into it, and it doesn't, so you can now take something else, or you can take a second engine text, so you can engine text twice, or whatever you're trying to do. Maybe those things just get errated onto the existing card, so you can still use all of your 1.0 stuff. Again, this might not sell as much as having an entire new core set that people have to buy, but Armada's already so expensive. I'm not sure like a 2.0 in the style of X-Wing is a good idea for a game that's already way too expensive. So an FAQ errata is probably a good idea, because that's the number one problem people don't play Armada, at least based on my research and my surveys, and the surveys that I run here on YouTube, when I talk to people, the number one problem is people say it's too expensive. The number 2 problem is that people say there's nobody around me playing. And that kind of fits into the number 1 problem, because if there's nobody around you playing, it's probably because it's too expensive for them to get. So if you reduce the cost, you're going to get more people playing, And so you're gonna fix both number 1 and number 2 problems. So that's clearly the way to go. And they've shown that they can do that with other games. Look at how much you're getting in Legion's core set versus how much you get in Armada's core set. You can really increase the value and cost. All right, and I'm going to talk more about that, but by doing it as a rules upgrade, you're not making that cost problem worse. Okay, so lots of errata. You can take all the existing cards that got changed or erased or whatever. Like Intel, you wouldn't have to remove cards. The damage control officer, if you bake that in a contain, you could just errata damage control officer to do something else along the lines of healing or preventing damage, right? Maybe you can maybe she's like Captain Brunson, but you can only use her once per game. You have to sacrifice her to cancel a die. Who knows? Right? Like there's a lot of little things you could change a damage control officer to be. So hard errata and rules update. Certainly preferable to, you have to rebuy everything. Here's what else you do to go along with that. People have been saying it for a long time, an essentials pack. Rune Wars is gone now, right? But the one of the things that Rune Wars did very, 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 very well was have an essentials pack. And an essentials pack is your starter without any ships. It's got your damage deck, it's got your dice, it's got your maneuver template, it's got your obstacles, it's got your range ruler, it's got your rules. I would also give it all of your errated cards, hard printed out. All of them. You've got all the cards now hard printed out in the Essentials pack. This way you get all those other players to come in and buy it. And if you need to update the damage deck, you can put that in the Essentials pack as well. You can keep this Essentials pack to be like $29. Probably. It probably won't even cost that much. That'd probably be a steal. But we're going to pack it with a bunch of cards. What other cards are we going to put in there? We're also going to put in, get this, we're also going to put in, and this is just me brainstorming, I'm not saying FFG is doing this, but we're also going to put in all of those cards that are like only found in one ship on one faction, so that are not dual faction cards, right? That means Spinal Armament, Turbo Laser Reroute Circuits, Heavy Ion Emplacements, all of those cards that you're like, I don't want to buy something across the aisle to get. You know what? We're not going to make you buy dual faction anymore. I'm not going to do it. It's already expensive. We're cutting the costs and giving you more value with the Essentials pack. Now, existing players are more likely to also pick up an Essentials pack because, hey, I could really use another copy of Heavy Ion Emplacements and I don't want to have to buy another MC75 to get it. I could use another copy of Spinal Armament. I could use another, expanded launchers. I could use another whatever. You know what? You name it, we got it in there. Okay? So all of those important key cards, probably all of the cards that are only available in the starter as well. I would probably include the original starter. If there's any, off the top of my head, I don't know if there's any that really need to be in there, but if there is, let's put them in there. Okay. So we're going to have all of those important cards that players need to get started with. So this way you can buy your ships a la carte. I'd probably include the commanders too. Like, let's just include the commanders from Tarkin. Maybe even some updates to Tarkin. And again, we can fine tune and rebalance a lot of stuff. That way, if Tarkin needs to be, we could probably do some things to command tokens too to maybe make those a little more desirable. Since there's so much emphasis on command tokens, like let's give all command tokens like a whole secondary usage. How about that? How about all command tokens have a whole secondary usage? I don't know. That's an idea that I have to flesh out a little bit more. But if there was more that you could do with command tokens to make them a little more desirable, that would make a lot of the mechanics on Armada 1.0 a little bit better. So that's what we would have in the Essentials pack. Now, why do we want an Essentials pack? Because we're also going to have new factions, right? Perfect launch point to kick off a second edition and justify that newer low cost is that, boom, Clone Wars factions. We got all kinds of new ships to buy. You don't have to buy a starter now. You can buy a Lucre Hulk. You can buy, these Separatist ships. You can buy your Republic ships. You can buy your Venator, your Republic Architans. You can even reprint the ones that are going to like the Peltas and the ones that are going to be in both. No problem. Come out with a whole line, 4 ships each, 2 squadron packs. Maybe 3. I would go 3 squadron packs for Clone Wars, right? You start off with your squadron pack 1 for each side, and then like your rogues and villains squadron pack 4, like a duel, one that has something for both. Okay, that'd be a good launch wave type of stuff. But do that. You launch your Clone Wars stuff at the same time. You have the Essentials pack. That's your starter. It's got stuff for everybody. It's got all that stuff. And then from this point forward, all the new expansions you release, you don't give like, only this one faction has access to, No, if you're going to put out a new Turbo Laser, you put it in everybody's stuff, Start making those upgrades more common. Let people buy the ships for the ships. And stop making people buy ships for a card on a game that the number one problem is already the cost. Okay? So that's what I would do for a 2.0 is I would make it like a soft 2.0. And then maybe someday you can come up with an enhanced starter. You can come up with a new 2.0 bundle after the fact. Once you stabilize the game and you get people to accept 2.0, you're like, hey, we're going to have... and a good time to do a new starter would be when episode 9 is done and you want to expand to 6 factions and you want to have the First Order and the Resistance. If you want to establish those as their own factions in the game and the game is doing well enough by that point, then maybe you launch a starter there as another entry point for people to get into the game. That's a possibility. Some other changes that I would make also is... one of the problems that I run into of people who do play already is that, the game time tends to be a problem. And there's a lot of suggestions that have been made, and I'll elaborate on some of these, on squadrons as well. So I wish that squadrons could be played quicker. And one of those things is the measurements. There are a lot of people complain about, everything's too many range 1 stuff. We have to make sure that I'm just in range to be able to engage this guy, but not get caught up by the escort, but I still don't want to be heavy because your intel guy's here. And so there becomes so much, precise measurement, that if you just simplified that to where it's like, you know what, from now on in 2.0, squadron bases have to be touching for them to be engaged or something like that. It would really cut down on all those precise measurements. That's an idea. If maybe you have to just be touching to engage and to shoot ships too. Maybe you have to be touching to shoot. So now all of a sudden there is no more of that precise measurement. That would speed up squadron play. That is definitely an idea. Another thing I would do is I would consolidate, kind of like how a Superstar Destroyer kind of puts half of your list in one ship, right? And you have I would do something like that for squadrons. Allow for squadrons to be more upgradable and fillable, because squadrons to me feel like moving individual fighters more than they feel like moving a squadron. A squadron's supposed to originally, I think a squadron's supposed to be something like 12 X-Wings or 12 TIE Fighters or something like that. I don't feel like I'm moving 12. I feel like I'm moving 1 or 2. In the case of the elite, especially in the case of the elites, like your Hal Runners and your Luke Skywalkers and your Wedges and Mauler Mythals, and I feel like I'm moving one dude, right? One lady or dude, right? I don't like that. I don't like the feel of squadrons in this game because it feels like I'm moving an individual fighter, especially when you've got Han Solo and the Falcon right next to him. That's the same size, and it's just one ship. So I don't feel like there's a whole squadron. Let's face it. I don't feel like that. I feel like an entire squadron of TIEs would easily be able to take down, like something like the Millennium Falcon, but. No, not even close. Like in this game, 2 squadrons of TIEs couldn't take down the Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon would wreck them super fast. So they don't feel right. So what I would do is I would allow these squadrons to be pumped up, and maybe we do that through putting extra minis on the bases. Maybe we even come out with a larger base that has like maybe up to 5, and you can however many squadrons you put on the base represents how beefy the squad is. So if I put 1 mini on there, it's the same sizes and the same balance as they are right now. If I put 2 minis on there, it's now twice as dense. Maybe 3 minis on there, it's triple as dense. And now it's like also costs like basically triple. Or maybe you have a sliding scale, like the more you put, the more dice they roll. And again, it's only 1 activation too, so you're speeding up. Instead of having 16 TIE Fighter little round discs cluttering up the board, maybe I only have 3, and I have that same amount of points, bumped up into 3 TIE Fighter squadrons of varying density. That feels to me a little bit more thematic and a little bit more appropriate, but maybe not everybody agrees with that. You don't have to. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think we should have, upgradable squadrons that we can dump more points into, make them denser, maybe give them a better attack, maybe give them more life, more hit points based on how much, how many squadrons we've pumped into any given squadron. That might mean that people buy less squadron packs, but since squadron packs are a rarity, I think that's probably a good thing for everybody. You should be able to buy 1 squadron pack and be good. And the thing is, maybe you'll still probably want 2 squadron packs of each type, because you don't want to just upgrade 1 TIE Fighter squadron a whole lot. Maybe you want 3 that are like medium density, but you shouldn't want people to have 16 TIE Fighter squadron packs, right? So that's just my thoughts on it. But I do like the idea that of them maybe having a touch to engage. I think all of those things are interesting ideas, but I would like squadrons basically to have speedier gameplay. And I think that in a lot of cases, squadron play takes longer than the ship play, and I feel like the game should more be about the ships and less about the squadrons. But that's my take. I'd love to hear what you guys think. There are a lot of really good things about Armada, though, and I feel like maybe that's better left for a whole separate video, because there's a lot of things I love, especially the bases and just the design of the pieces and how so much information is consolidated under this one base. Your shields, you got all your information on there. The ship itself is in the ships and models are beautiful. There's a lot of really good things, and I think my favorite thing about Armada is just how you set up. And it's so beautiful when you're taking that first turn. How are we going to engage? And just in that movement to contact phase, that initial, we haven't rolled dice yet, but we're getting ready to. And it's just beautiful watching it. It's like watching a movie unfold on your tabletop, and I love it. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Don't forget to make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment and to win that lightsaber giveaway I've got going on right now. Definitely check out the link to the Steel Command article. Great blog, and that's about all I've got for you guys. I want to thank you all so much for watching. I want to thank my patrons on Patreon. You guys are amazing and definitely help make all this possible. And I want to thank FFG for giving us a great game, and hopefully that has decades of support and thriving and growth throughout the years. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day.